today is Steve Howe from Yes. Yes recently finished up the first leg of their North American tour, where they've been selling out shows throughout the country. Steve was not a founding member of Yes, but came in after the first couple of albums. And I asked him about the sound of that band and how important, first of all, the rhythm section was to the sound and how he fit in.
Well, the original stylings of Yes were invented somewhat even before I joined, and the first two albums, quite amazing that I'm not on Yes, and then Time and a Word. Time and a Word is a really, really good record, and it says an awful lot about the direction of the group. And as you say, the role of the drumming in Yes has always been a very special thing. Like most of the components, they're kind of trimmed or specialized for this group, and the drumming was no exception. And Bill, of course, landed us with some nights he'd say to us, I'm going to play everything different tonight, and we go, no, Bill, please don't do that, please. No, all those drum breaks, they're not going to be boom, they're going to be so he'd sometimes throw out the model and put his own spontaneous model in. But the rhythms that Yes use are very important. I think it's helped me to play in a more rhythmical way than purely melodic.
A lot of things I want to talk about with you, particularly what I find really interesting about the homebrew discs is you get to, which are solo discs, taken, I assume, from recordings you did at your house.
That's right.
Yeah. Are where some of the little bits and pieces come from that, and a little bit of insight into how the compositions take place for the group. Explain a little bit of the dynamic. Does a lot of the composition with Yes, has it over the years gone on in the studio?
No, initially we always had a rehearsal period that allowed us to pull the ideas, sometimes put them on a Revox or a cassette player and sort of get a rough idea, well, if not sometimes quite a solid idea. I have a tape of us playing Gates of Delirium where we just play the whole damn thing and we're not even in the studio.
Wow.
So there was, on certain tracks, there was all the work paid its dividends. Other tracks we'd take to a certain level in rehearsal room, knowing that when we got in the studio we were going to play with it more, and that's usually what we did. I think the 80s and the 90s, it was a bit more like just go in the studio with some tunes in your head and start wasting studio time trying to hammer them together. And some records are very extravagant and rather dull because of that. I think Yes is a band that, like an orchestra, it needs organisation, and that writing process in the rehearsal room is where some of the great pieces, like A You and I, where the great structures and arrangements were developed. They wouldn't have been developed any better with more pressure and more money to pay for the time. This was a rehearsal room. We kicked it around for days, how this tune was going to be progressing from one key to another, and this was going to happen, that was going to happen. So those building arrangements is most probably one of Yes's strongest sides.
Well, one of the ones I thought we might want to, I love the way it kind of flows in, is maybe play the Serpentine, and then people can see how explain how this was later worked in.
Right. What happened was somewhere in the very late 60s, I was on a lake called the Serpentine in Hyde Park in London with somebody, and it was an amazing moment, you know what I mean? It was a stunning moment. And quite a few years later, I'm playing stuff to John, and we're sorting through songs, and we take a few of my lyrics, John writes a bundle of his own lyrics, and we start doing it. But what happens on Homebrew 2? On Homebrew 2, there's the moments that are drawn besides that basic song, which is one of the most basic songs. And Homebrew is the bottom drawer idea of being able to open it up, pull out those things, play them to John. And we just kicked music around because I had a stockpile. The same with John. He has songs that were, hanging in there, something sentimental he liked or something he thought nobody else would ever like, because writers are just humans, we do sometimes keep things because we're not sure about them as well. Right. We keep them because, we don't know if anyone's going to like this. And when somebody does, it opens up a floodgate.
it's very hard to see things from the very beginning and see what they're going to turn into.
Exactly.
Well, let's see what that turns into. Let's play To Be Over and see if people can recognize some of these melodies that are also part of the Serpentine. To Be Over. Part of that comes from the Serpentine, which is from Homebrew 2, which is a recording made in the late 1960s.
Well, the recording's made in the 70s. Yeah, I started recording on a Revox in the 70s when I got one, and then I didn't get a multi-track until the 80s, which is why all the music from 1980, is on multi-track, and the earlier stuff's much cruder. But I like some of that crude recording techniques.
How has new technology affected what you do?
Very little. My own studio, it just means instead of having an analog 8-track, I've got a digital 8-track. I kind of refuse to make the investments and the commitments and create the worries that go with having a multi-track studio of the conventional kind. Today, of course, you can just get a desk that's got 24 tracks that Roland most probably made. It's all very easy. One might go to that at some point, but I'm an 8-track recorder. I like the limitations it offers me because it means I can take my idea and take my dream and start my dream.
I'm interested in how you first got started in music.
Well, I came from a pretty unmusical family, except that they like listening to music, and the records that were in my parents' collection were most probably the most important records that I ever encountered. And the two very strong, powerful ingredients there were Les Paul and Mary Ford records on 78, and also a really wacky guy who I like so much is Tennessee Ernie Ford, and he had some brilliant backup musicians called Speedy West and Jimmy Bryant, the guitar duo, who are awesome. They've just come in the last few years. Their music's been released on CD, and it's awesome. These guys invented the guitar break. These guys made the guitar break so stunning that you just had to play them again. You know? So those two artists and their 78s, I'd heard even before I started playing the guitar, and I thought they were pretty out there. You know, I thought it was pretty good, even though, you know, it wasn't what per se young people were listening to. Well, then of course a group called the Shadows and Cliff Richard and Elvis and
you and everybody else in England.
Yeah, I mean, we had our own sort of British rock movement, but most of it came from here. And when I heard Bill Haley and Little Richard, Chuck Berry, you know, that was it. You know, I wanted to do this. I wanted to be part of this. So between 10 and 12, I got my parents, you know, like wound up about, I was going to have a guitar, aren't I? Isn't it now? And when am I going to get it? And all this. So I'm 12, I get a guitar. And for a couple of years, I'm really shy, pretty reclusive. Although innerly quite confident, almost stupidly confident that I could play this thing. You know, even when the day I got it, I kind of said that I could play it, which was kind of a joke, really. Well, it is a joke now to look back at it, but I had this stupid confidence at first. For a couple of years, I just picked away on my own in my bedroom, and one of my friends came in and said, listen to this, and it was Freewheeling by Bob Dylan. You know, and I sat there, and I knew I was hearing something good, but I was also fighting this challenging change in my ears, because everything before that had been sort of very pretty, very smooth, and suddenly there was this guy playing this harmonic, you know, and his guitar, and it was a phenomenal experience. I still remember hearing that first album, and I was totally hooked. I needed to find out who this guy was. So that got me pretty hooked. I then, you know, moved along with Bob and had Highway 61 and made all the changes and fell in love with this whole approach to music. And many of the guitarists that he played with, I liked as well. So coming up to this time, one day I decided I was going to record The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll. It was like just a way out thought. I'll record this song. And I recorded it about 3 or 4 years ago. And then, so once I'd done that, I thought, that's when it came to me. I could do a whole album like this. I mean, I can arrange Bob Dylan songs. It was like a revelation. So I did that. I started doing that. In a 3-week period, I recorded a lot of that album, the basic ideas of it. But then somebody said to me, well, in fact, Phoebe Snow said to me as I was asking her to sing, she said, have you spoke to Bob about this? Because, you know, if you're doing a whole album, you better. So I went, wow, I didn't even think along those lines. So I quickly got through to Bob and his management people, who were absolutely great. I mean, A1, and before long I had a complete approval, you know, freedom to do what I like, any songs I liked of Bob's, and also a new song. This is the great thing. People say, how did you get Well, Well, Well? I didn't get it. I got offered it. I was given it by Bob's people. So basically, when I heard the new song, I thought it was great to have an unreleased Dylan song. Meant that I could start from the ground up. So, you know, to find ways of arranging that song, because I basically had a pretty simple idea. You know, the way it came down was that was a track I really enjoyed doing, because I didn't have a big blueprint for it.
Well, should we play Well, Well, Well?
Yeah, why not?
Okay. Steve Howe's new, I don't know if you want to call it a tribute album, but sort of a...
That's okay.
Yeah, a look at...
Portraits was a way of calling it tribute without...
One of the things that I've always loved about is your Spanish guitar playing, your nylon string playing, because it's such a different texture, and to have that texture in Yes was such a positive thing for that group, because there's so much, it provides a lightness.
Yes.
Which is really, really good for the group. Now, I understand this is a special... do you have this Martin made for you?
Well, you're on the right story, but this is it exactly. Back in 1968, I desired a guitar like this. You know, I was in England and I had acoustics before, but they were all archtop F-hole guitars, and that's basically where I started, on a sort of like a jazzer guitar more than a
like
folk
a Gretsch or a...
F-holes and no pickups, but I having heard Paul Simon and having heard American recordings, I knew there was something that we weren't doing in England, and so I eventually saw an advert for this guitar, and I went into town and I saw it, and I bought a guitar like this. It's called a Martin 0018. So I bought this 0018, and it was the perfect guitar for me. You know, the fingers, the size, the sound that they produce has a lot of presence. And this went on Roundabout, and many of the classic pieces, all of the acoustic pieces that I played with Yes and other bands were done on that guitar. So a few years back, Dick Bocott Martin, who of course in Nazareth, Pennsylvania, said to me, you know, we've been doing a signature series. We've just done Joan Baez, Sting, you know, and I thought, wow, these you know, I'm in the names there. So he said, look, you ought to have this as well. I mean, we'd like to do this with you. So I held my breath, and he said immediately, the 0018. So we started developing discussion on what the concept of behind a signature model is, and the same applies to, you know, the other artists' version. They look back at the favourite Martin that artist has, and they reproduce that era. So this is a 53 reproduction, if you like. Okay. This is a reissue 1953 Martin, because although I bought my guitar in 68, it was a 1953 model. It's not the only guitar I play. Martin know and appreciate that I move across a few different guitars, but centrally Martin's been one of my most successful acoustic guitars that I use. I suppose I ought to play something.
Yeah, I was
soon.
just going to say, you're overdue
it's sounding
here.
like I'm going to just keep rapping about this and never play the damn thing. I'll play a piece called Initial. I've written a lot of my music for my children, and when Virgil, my son, was born, we couldn't think of anything to go with Virgil Howe. I mean, if you can think of anything, put it on a stamped addressed envelope and send it to me. But it's too late. He's 24. We couldn't think of anything. So all those years ago, I started fiddling with this tune. You know, and it comes out to be called Second Initial, because he doesn't have one.
Second Initial, that solo piece from Steve Howe, finishing off our World Cafe 50 session with Steve Howe from Yes, today on the World Cafe.